Looks like we are live. I'm George Simons, founder of Solo. We have on the show today Ben Jackson. How you doing, Ben?
Hey, everybody. I am the co-founder of Upsolve, a bankruptcy nonprofit.
Fantastic. Ben, happy to have you on the Debt Hotline today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Great. So we are talking about how to respond to debt lawsuits, how to get your debt fully resolved, how to do bankruptcy, etc. Maybe you can tell us just a little bit more about what people are doing on Upsolve and like what they are doing with bankruptcy on Upsolve.
So if you're struggling with debt, like I was about 6-7 years ago, I had $60,000 in credit card debts. I was only making $20,000 a year. You might hit a point where the only thing you do, or the only thing you can do, is say, like, I can't deal with this anymore. And the cool thing about the US legal system is that it has a process in it called bankruptcy, specifically Chapter 7 bankruptcy, that recognizes that sometimes that happens. Sometimes you have a life emergency, maybe you got divorced, maybe you got injured, and you rack up a ton of debt that you just can't deal with. And unlike some countries where you used to, go to prison for having too much debt to deal with, in America, you can say, I need help, I need a fresh start. And that fresh start is called bankruptcy. In a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, essentially what happens is you apply to the court, and as long as the assets that you have don't exceed a certain amount covered by bankruptcy exemptions, you typically will go through that. You'll get all of your unsecured debt, so credit cards, personal loans, things like that, forgiven. You typically won't lose any property, and you'll be able to move on with your life, usually with fairly few, if any, negative circumstances to you. So what we do at Upsolve is we make that application process really easy. You can think of it as being TurboTax for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. And it takes a process that took me months, like literally months, to figure out and do incorrectly. It takes that process down to about 2 to 3 hours total of work time. You get something in your hands that you can go and file successfully with the court. We do that entirely for free on our website, upsolve.org.
Fantastic. Love it. So, right. So if you're looking for bankruptcy options, folks, you guys can go over to upsolve.org and see that offering there. We reserve quite a bit of the time here on the Debt Hotline for any questions that live listeners have. So if you have questions, go ahead and put that into the chat, and we will see if we can get to that. We also have quite a few people who have written in their questions, and we have people who leave questions on our hotline. If you want to leave a question on the hotline, you can just call in and ask a question as well. So first question here is Allie in Arizona. And Allie, if you're on live, just let us know in the chat. So a question from Allie. I have over $35,000 in credit card debt. And that's a lot of money. That is a lot of money, Allie. Sorry to hear about it. Across 5 credit cards. One with a bank account, which is the highest. I have been paying up to the year past when interest rates went up, and so did the interest rates on the one that was current. I had some major, it's tough. I had some major emergency. My home plumbing, auto repair, health insurance all went up in cost. Our home income was reduced to only Social Security. Okay, sounds like a bit of a perfect storm here.
Yeah, no kidding.
Unfortunately, which I think perfect storm isn't quite the right word, right? Because it's not a
terrible
storm.
Not
perfect. It's not perfect for you.
Yeah.
Right. And then my question is, there's no way. I have no way to increase our income. I can't consolidate our loans. Is it better if we file for bankruptcy, or what we have left to pay for years, since we are not healthy and we're seeking alternative health solutions? All the stress is not good for our health, that's for sure.
Yeah.
For sure it's not. Please advise. I already was served for 1 credit card, and I paid Solo Suit to assist in stopping. So I'm guessing you used our debt answer product. So you created an answer and got it filed in court. I'm waiting to hear back on the next step to take before the other credit card companies take the same action against them. I've closed all my accounts. I hope the information is clear here. Bottom line is, should I file bankruptcy since I'm 71 years old
Hmm.
and will be paying for years with with less money to
Hmm.
put towards healthcare?
Hmm. Hmm.
There you go. Well, quite the situation there, Ben. What do you think?
Yeah, really sorry to hear that, Allie. That sounds so stressful. So I would say, Allie, you did the right thing in making sure that you responded to that debt lawsuit, because that could have gotten out of hand really quickly. And when you're struggling with debt, if you're being sued, dealing with that, at least filing an answer for that, is the most important thing to do first, so that you don't, get a default judgment and end up having wages, things like that, garnished. So, as to what you should do next, it kind of depends on what your priorities are. If you are okay, or would you prefer to have a payment plan over time? Sometimes you can negotiate what's called a debt management plan, where you get a reduced interest rate on the debts that you have going forward, and it lowers your overall repayment significantly. Because as people know, if you look at your debt, most of what you end up paying back is interest. That interest can get out of control quickly. And with something like a debt management plan, it will reduce that interest so you can pay it off faster. So if you're somebody, and there are people like this who says, I really need to own my debt, I need to take personal responsibility for this, like that's okay. There are repayment plans like that available to you. So that's one thing to consider. Now, if you're somebody who really just needs to get out of this debt quickly, like it sounds like you said your health isn't going really well. I know you mentioned a couple other big changes coming along, and you're saying you're not going to get any more income than you have now. And that $35,000 in debt is really weighing you down, like it would. That's a lot of debt to have and to struggle with. Then bankruptcy can be a good option for you, because it can make that debt go away right away. It will also stop pretty much any lawsuit that's going on related to that debt. And so you'll be able to move forward, take a breath, and then figure out what to do after that. And if you are interested in seeing if bankruptcy could be right for you, you can go to our website, upsolve.org, take our free screener there, and see if this could be something that can help you get rid of that debt right away. But, I work at a bankruptcy nonprofit. I will say bankruptcy is not for everybody, and that tool will help you figure out if it's right for you. I think you might be muted, George.
Ben, you
There you
mentioned that it would stop the lawsuits, bankruptcy will.
go.
What's the process that those lawsuits get stopped once you file bankruptcy?
Yeah, so there's something called an automatic stay. So as soon as you file for bankruptcy, an automatic stay goes in place. And what that does is it stops all collection activity legally. And lawsuits, until they reach a certain point, are technically a collection activity. And so they're required to stop those lawsuits pending the adjudication of the bankruptcy case. In many cases, there are some exceptions to that, but in most cases, that will end any ongoing lawsuits, assuming that you filed an answer.
And who notifies the lawyer that's suing you about that stay?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it depends state by state. George, you know how that tends to happen in the lawsuits you've worked on?
I believe that oftentimes so if you're being represented by a bankruptcy attorney, the attorney would
The attorney would notify you.
notify the other attorney. I think if
Mhm.
you're doing it yourself, I
You
believe
would
that
need
you're going to
to.
have to advocate yourself for notifying the other attorneys.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm getting at there, right? So yeah, but there is this
Yeah.
like automatic stay. It's up to you once you filed bankruptcy to actually self-advocate
Yep.
still and
Yeah.
notify everybody that, hey, you can't sue me anymore. Like the lawsuits
Yep.
stayed because of the bankruptcy filing.
Exactly. And there are so as part of your bankruptcy proceedings, there's a notice that gets sent out to creditors. So if one of those creditors was a debt collector, they're going to get a notice. So worst comes to worst, let's say just can't get in touch with whoever you're supposed to get in touch to, they will get a notice in that format. But generally speaking, to George's point, it's a really good idea to advocate for yourself in those instances and let them know, hey, I filed.
Right. Allie, you know, yeah, sorry to hear about the hard times here. Sounds like you're just looking at your finances generally, right? It sounds like you're retired, you're living on Social Security, you have 35K in debt. Bit of a tough spot to be in. Uh, the question I would have is how did you get into this $35,000 in debt? Is that debt that was put towards
Mm-hmm.
your healthcare? It sounds like maybe it was, right? It sounds like Sounds like maybe you lost your job, maybe you didn't retire exactly. You had all these expenses that came up, like the plumbing, the auto repair. If you get into a situation like that again in the future, I would definitely encourage you to take a look to see what you can do to
Mhm.
avoid getting into that credit card debt, right? It's a really tough spot. The
Mhm.
credit cards are enticing. People are offering you
Mhm.
a lot of money that sometimes seems free initially,
Mhm.
but the interest rates are very high, especially if you're holding over the balance on the credit cards, which is what you essentially did here. Uh, and sometimes people are able to get you, senior discounts come into play to some degree. I don't know if that would
Mhm.
save you that much money. Uh, Ben, are you aware of like any other ideas here for someone in Ali's position
Mhm.
who is potentially like retired, but all of a sudden has a bunch of costs that are coming in?
Yeah. So your state may well have some senior benefits that you can take advantage of if you don't. When I was struggling with debt, I actually ended up on food stamps, which is something that I never saw for myself. But man, were those a huge relief when you're really trying to dig out and just struggling with it. And to George's point, like there's some people who say like, you know, these cards are enticing. We hope your behavior changes. You don't end up in debt again after you get out of this debt. To that point, there's a lot of research that shows that when you're in debt, it's really hard to make good financial decisions. There's this scarcity mentality that kicks in where it's like, well, I need to have some sort of relief or joy or pleasure in my life because I'm just check to check, and that's so stressful, and it results in you end up spending more money than you would if you didn't have that debt in the first place. So what I found is as soon as I finally got out of debt, all the hard work that I had been doing to try to save money and try to avoid debt actually started mattering. And that was really motivating, right? Like it actually got easier to save money and continue going forward. So I would say, if you are concerned about what's going to happen after the fact, that happens for a lot of people. Um, and if you do decide that bankruptcy is the route to go, there is definitely hope on the other side of it.
Right. Yeah, and folks, if you are listening, preparing for retiring, I think number
Mhm.
one financial tip I've found in my life is just put 5 to 10% of your income, if you
Yeah,
can,
as
as much
best
as
you
it,
can. Yeah.
up to 20% if you can afford it,
Yeah.
into a retirement fund of some sort, into like a
Yep.
401k, or even just a brokerage account, probably like a Roth IRA, something like
Yep.
that. Just buy total market index funds,
Mhm.
something like that is a good place to start, right?
Yeah, and
Uh,
if you're struggling with debt now and you're like, "Well, how the hell am I gonna put away money?" Right? Because I was getting that same advice when I was in debt. The
yep,
sooner you get out of debt, the sooner you're gonna be able to start investing in yourself and make that money work for you instead of working for the credit card companies.
indeed. Right. Yep. If you can put money into just like a total market index fund, they
Mhm.
outperform a lot of other investment options. Oftentimes they'll get you 10% returns annually over time and just leave money in there for the long term.
I wish I
All right,
had
we got
learned that
a
sooner in life.
yep, always best to start, as early as you can, really. All right, we got a live question here from Nico. Hi, I have a second court letter. What should I do now? The first court letter, uh, I got help from Solo, but there's no
Mm,
solution from the bank. Now I got second letter from the court. Please help and thank you, Nico. Maybe you could give us a little bit more
mm,
context here. I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about here with the second court letter. Sounds like you were sued for a
mm,
debt. You got the complaint and summons. It's not an uncommon situation here where people will just refer to like the next document as the second court letter because it's kind of hard to understand exactly what's happening.
mm,
There's probably a title on your document, and usually it's in like the top right hand corner of the document that'll say something. It might say motion for summary judgment. It might say request for interrogatories or
mm,
request for admissions or interrogatories. Uh, might say something like that. There'll probably be a title on the document, and that
mm,
really determines what you need to do next. Um, you can upload that document with our chat feature on Solo, and just ask our AI about it and try to figure out what this document is and what you need to do next as well.
I'm curious if he got sued again. So that's was my reading of that. I got sued once, maybe got sued again about a different debt.
Hmm. Yeah, if you got sued again, then every case is unique. You need to respond to every case individually with the answer. It's not uncommon for people to be sued multiple times. Usually, if you're on solo and you've been sued, you probably have, on average, people have 4 other accounts that are delinquent. They might get sued for those accounts. Sometimes people don't know about those accounts. So you can do something in that regard as well. And maybe you can consider bankruptcy if this is way over your head and you have a lot of debt. You have a lot of debt for the income that you're bringing in every month. Another live question here from Joanna. Does making a payment to a debt collector reset the statute of limitations in Texas? This is a pretty common question that we get. Making a payment to a debt collector generally does reset the statute of limitations. We have a debt settlement calculator that you can find if you search like debt settlement calculator solo suit or solo in Google. That'll pull up our calculator. You can find out exactly what the statute of limitations are in Texas. It also links to the statute, to the statutes, to the relevant law. Most likely, usually the statute of limitations runs from basically the last payment that you made, the date of the last payment.
I think it's 4 years in Texas. Yeah.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, 4 years.
Yeah. It usually will vary depending on exactly what type of debt it is. 4 years is probably for the credit card debt.
Yeah.
And so, Joanna, that doesn't mean you shouldn't make a payment. At this point, if you're being sued for the debt, you'll want to get an agreement in writing before you start making payments again. You want to get an agreement in writing with the collector outlining terms of settlement for you. And anything you want to weigh in on there?
No, that's well said.
Joanna, since you're on live, give us some more context. Let us know, like, why are you being sued for this debt? What did the debt originate from? What's your financial position like? Like, how much are you making each year? What does that look like? What does this debt proportion look like in relationship to your income? And let's see. So we have a question written in from James. I owe around $5,600 in credit card debt, but only after having someone use my identity to open up an account.
Yikes.
Max them out and not pay them. That's a bummer. Identity theft is bad news. We get a good number of people who are coming to us for situations like this. I suppose probably doesn't feel like a small amount, but thankfully they weren't able to get you into more debt than $5,600.
Yeah, no kidding.
I was already sued by Midland Credit Management and currently have 3 accounts with LVNV funding. Okay, so those guys are debt buyers, right? Midland and LVNV, they both buy debts. So that means the credit card companies sold the debts to the debt buyers in this case. I have a few other debts in collection, as well as a couple credit cards and an old car loan from a repossessed vehicle. I fell behind because I didn't pay them since the debt is not mine. I disputed the transactions and some of the companies deleted the debt from my files, but Midland and LVNV absolutely refused to. So my question is, I haven't heard anything from Midland since May 2024. There has not been any more court dates since then either. Why would they be waiting like they are? What should my next step be? I paid the money and used the document I downloaded from Solo to file my response to the summons. Great, good job. What do you think, Ben?
What should he do next? So I'm not sure. I don't know a ton about debt collector strategy post lawsuit. So that would definitely be your lane, George. But I'd be curious to know, what was the gentleman's name again? I'm sorry, I missed it.
This is James.
James, I'd be curious to know about these other debt items. I know you said you had $5,600 in credit card debt, but it sounded like you had a few other items that have been in collections as well. Couldn't quite tell from the question if those things were included in this lawsuit, if they were not. It would be surprising to have that many collectors involved for $5,600. So, what I would say as relates to bankruptcy, which is my expertise, is if you do still have some outstanding debt and that debt wasn't involved in the lawsuits that you mentioned, it would be a good idea to take care of that debt in some way, either through negotiated repayment or a debt management plan or filing bankruptcy to get out of that, which to the earlier discussion we had, that would stop any lawsuits that were in process. It wouldn't stop any judgments that had been brought against you if the debt collectors did get a judgment on that debt, but it would stop any ongoing lawsuits. So I'd say the first thing is see if you can figure out with an expert, or if you have some time to sit down and write it down yourself, what's actually going on with all these different debts and collectors and lawsuits. Because it sounds like there's a few things that might still be going on. And George, I don't know if you want to add anything to that about like post-collection strategy or anything.
It's a great suggestion to sit down and write things down for sure. I think writing can help people make sense of the situation some more. So it'll probably be pretty difficult to sit down and write about it, but I
Yeah.
definitely suggest even just using a paper and a pencil,
Hmm.
using your phone notes app, just to jot down some notes and try to make some sense out of these things.
Or
Right,
ramble into ChatGPT. That's been something I've been doing lately. Just here's all this
ramble into
stuff. Help me
ChatGPT.
figure out what's going on. Yeah.
Exactly right. Yep.
Yeah.
Uh,
What do you think,
so
George, about that posts? Like why they would not be reaching out at all, like this far after the initial
uh,
lawsuit was filed?
a few different theories, So at Solo, we've been building our relationships with collectors so that we can get the consumers that are coming to us, get them the best deals. So we can just understand how collectors work, understand what they need, what their terms are for like settlements, so we can just work with consumers and help the consumer get the deal that works for them the best. So with Midland and LVNV, right, we're helping people settle with them pretty frequently, and helping people respond to the lawsuit to protect their rights, and then helping them get a settlement. And uh, with Midland, probably what's going on here is they have most likely actually flagged the account for James as disputed.
Hmm.
And so in their like case management system, right? It's important to think about collectors as a person sitting behind a computer in a call center, right? There's like a guy that's looking at your account. There's probably like 20 other people around him. They're in an open floor. It's probably like a big TV up somewhere talking about how much money and accounts they're collecting during the day. And he's in his software and he looks at James's account, and somewhere in there there's going to be a tag saying that the account's under dispute, so they can't
Hmm.
contact James, and they also like can't proceed with the lawsuit. That's probably what's going on here. uh, so in order to move forward on the case, they would need James to come in and like proactively say, I no longer dispute this account for identity theft.
Hmm.
That's not the case here, right? James does dispute the account for
Hmm.
identity theft. So Midland's internal team is probably taking a look at this account to determine whether or not identity theft actually applies.
Hmm.
And it's probably not that high on their priority list to like get rid of these disputed accounts off their docket. So it's probably just sitting there in court until eventually they'll figure that out. And if they determine that it's under dispute, they might just move for if
Hmm.
they determine the dispute's valid, they'll hopefully just move to dismiss the case, and then James will be wrapped up.
George, how often do you see it that someone disputes this claim and the debt collector says, you know what, like they responded, we were hoping for a default judgment, like the fact that they're active, we just don't want to deal with this at all. Like, does that happen?
You're asking how often does the dispute win? You mean like how often does the collector just leave it alone after the dispute?
Yeah, well, I mean, not even win, but like just say this is not worth us continuing to litigate.
Oh yeah, regularly. We see it quite a bit,
Hmm.
and it's hard for us to totally track that data,
Yeah.
but we're under the impression that usually when a case gets dismissed in the solo platform, it's because of identity theft, most
Hmm.
especially, or the collector has this like mistakenly, like they try to do their best, but mistakenly just sued the wrong person.
Yeah. Yeah.
or sorry, identity theft, etc.
Yeah. All the more reason that you need to respond to these lawsuits. 'Cause that might be
Exactly.
enough.
Right. Yep. Because if James hadn't responded with the answer, then it's likely that the case would have just been a default judgment and would have gone forward, right? But with the answer, you can assert identity theft issues. You can say that you don't owe the debt, etc. So that's an important part of all of this. And then, yeah, James. So identity theft. So you want to get a police report on the identity theft if you can still. I know it's probably been a while, but if you can get a police report, get a police report documenting the identity theft. And then y'all want to send letters to the credit bureaus, any credit bureaus that list these debts that aren't yours, requesting that they remove the debt because you dispute them and for purposes of identity theft. To your point, Ben, James had mentioned that he does have a few other debts
Mhm.
that are in collections, right? Sounds like maybe those are yours, James. You have this repossessed vehicle. It sounds like you're worried about the vehicle. Oftentimes, what happens is a creditor will sue you. They'll repossess the vehicle, and then they will sue you for the deficiency
Mhm.
of the loan, which is a really unfortunate situation, right? Really bad spot to be in, where you'll buy the vehicle for $20,000. The creditor then repossesses the vehicle for 15,000. Oh, they repossess the vehicle, they sell it for 15,000, and then they sue you for the difference. They'll sue you for the
Mhm.
5,000 remaining. So that's a bad spot to be in because you've totally lost your collateral there.
Mhm.
So you'll want to be on the lookout there, and you'll want to, find ways to save
Mhm.
up more money here, find ways to increase your income
Mhm.
to get out of this position. Perhaps if you have some assets or something, if you have a vehicle that you can sell to pay off that remaining loan, that would put you in a better position.
Hmm. And if it does come to it, you can discharge most deficiency judgments in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. So if that does survive and you do get that judgment against you and you just can't repay it, that can be an option.
Indeed. We had a follow-up from Joanna. She asked her earlier question. So Joanna had asked, does making a debt payment reset the statute of limitations in Texas? And she followed up here. She was saying that this is regarding a $2,000 loan I got back in 2021. Then I lost my job during COVID.
Hmm.
Now I'm getting emails about the debt, but never received anything through postal mail. And she goes on, but I definitely want to pay back, but I'm afraid it'll reset the statute of limitations and currently going through jobs and being afraid
Hmm.
of being sued. Yeah, understandable, right? Being sued, not knowing if you're being sued is the worst. You're getting emails. That's a more of a modern path of collection. So sometimes collectors will consider your acceptance of email notifications when you sign up for a debt, when you sign up for a loan, to be like a consent to receive emails. If they're emailing you, they need you to opt in to receive those emails. There should be an easy option for you to opt out if you don't want to get those emails and request something through postal mail. It sounds like you're familiar with this loan, so I think doing anything like that will just kind of be a technicality. I think what we're hoping for you is that you can get a solid job
Hmm.
underneath you, and then try to get a plan to pay off this debt at a discount. Any other? What's your take here, Ben?
Did we answer the initial question? I saw this one here. I think the initial was like, would it reset if I made a payment?
Yeah, we answered that one. Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yep. It will reset. Yep.
Yep. Yeah, no additional take. It's an important thing to watch out for those statute of limitations if you're getting close. But I would also say people can get in trouble waiting around hoping that it expires, because the longer you wait, the more challenging the circumstances are going to be. Sometimes if you're not yet like with a debt collector, let's say you're not in a lawsuit situation, sometimes in that situation, you can actually call the credit card company and negotiate a lower rate before you get sued and have that whole situation going on. So pay attention to it, but be very careful if you're waiting for statute of limitations to run out. It's usually a good idea if you're playing that game to have a lawyer that you can talk with.
Right. Yep, indeed. Yes, and Joanna, perhaps you're not being sued. It sounds like you haven't been sued for this debt yet. You can still use Solo Settle to make an offer and settle the debt. And the software will help you make sure that the appropriate terms are in the settlement agreement when you get that thing settled. Okay, we have time for maybe one more question here. We have this question live from Apothecarian. I'm considering applying for a consolidation loan for credit card debt incurred by a close family member that I'm unable to pay. If I apply, how best to proceed to negotiate debt prior to consolidation?
So it sounds like you're asking if you can consolidate it or negotiate it down. Sorry, negotiate it down prior to consolidating, so you have a smaller amount to consolidate. It's a good question. I'm not clear if you're late on this yet or if you've talked with your creditors or collectors. If this is still with creditors, they may be willing to give you a hardship exemption to reduce your interest rates. They're not going to reduce the principal on it. That's not something that happens. And you'll usually need to prove some form of hardship to get them to reduce this. Now, if you're on time with your payments, it's very unlikely that they're going to negotiate this down pre-consolidation. So if it's important to you to get something in place quickly, you can certainly try. Like, there's no harm in contacting them to say, hey, can we reduce the interest rate payments on this? But they're not going to reduce that principal. So your consolidation amount's ultimately going to be the same. So if consolidation is the route you want to go, there's not a ton of reason to not just go that route now. Now, whether you get a good rate for consolidation depends on what your current credit score is. What we tend to see is people don't really get much of an interest reduction from consolidation unless they have fairly good credit as is. And something like a debt management plan where a nonprofit organization negotiates with the creditors for a lower rate for you, and then you enter into a repayment with them, that often ends up being a better option for people that are really trying to repay that debt quickly. So hopefully that's helpful. It's been a few years since the last payments. Okay. So be curious if it is in collections now or if it's like pre-collections. If it's pre-collections, you'd want to contact the creditors themselves and say, hey, what can we do here to reduce this? And that process is typically called settlement. If you want to search that on Google and say, what are the best strategies for debt settlement? Because there's definitely strategy for it.
Great. Ben, if you have a minute, there's one last question I'd like to get to. Seems particularly poignant. This is Brian in Michigan.
Hey, Brian.
Howdy. I received the summons several months ago regarding a debt collection lawsuit of a $20,000 Amex account, which I owe.
Okay.
And that, it's always good to come to terms with the fact that you owe the debt, Brian.
Yeah.
If in fact you do owe the debt. It's also important to realize, right? In these things, there's a few tiers, right? There's the principal, that is like what you spent on the credit card. There's the interest, which might be surprising, but the credit card companies do try to make that pretty clear, like what's on there on the agreements. And then also, when it gets to the lawsuit, there will be like collection fees, attorney's fees as well. That will be all contributing to that $20,000 amount, probably. In that initial answer to the complaint, I responded truthfully, agree or disagree to each paragraph, line, item to avoid my default judgment. 2 of the 10, I responded lacking sufficient information. I also responded with subject to private arbitration clause. Okay, so it sounds like you made your answer, you got it filed in court. You said, I don't know to some of the clauses, right? You said, like, I don't have enough information to respond, yes or no. And then you denied most of the others. You admitted some of the other ones as well. You just responded truthfully, which is the best way to go. Fast forward to today, I have received another summons for another lawsuit, I believe, with an updated status of a civil action between these parties arising out of the transaction occurrence alleged in the complaint has been previously filed, referencing the case number and assigned to Judge John Smith. The action no longer shows as pending. Quite the title, right, Ben?
Yeah.
Sometimes, I mean, in cases, you can title documents kind of whatever you want, right? It's just a title for the document.
Yeah.
It breaks down to somewhat formalized and formulaic titles, but really you can give a document the title of almost anything you want. Did that title really were you able to follow that title here, Ben? A civil action between these parties arising out of the transaction occurrence alleged in the complaint previously filed.
Yeah, it sounds like a clawback dispute. They're saying that there was like preferential treatment to one creditor and a repayment or something. Is that what you got from that?
I'm not sure what I'm getting out of that. I don't know. Civil action between these parties.
Yeah, it sounds like they're suing each other related to a clawback that occurred in repayment of debt. If that's the case, essentially what a clawback is for the audience, if you make a payment to one debt collector and not to another, there's a process in debt collection lawsuits whereby they can claw back a portion of the total amount paid that is relative to the amount that you owed to them versus everybody else. So like if you owed $100 and you owed, $10 to this bank, they're entitled to 10% of that total amount. So if you pay that $100 back, that's the amount that they should have gotten in that instance. So they would be able to claim, their 10% or whatever. So it might be something like that. It's not clear to me what it is from that lawsuit. I don't know if anything else in that jumped out at you, George.
Yeah, it sounds like they're kind of starting a new lawsuit about a transaction from the last lawsuit, right? Potentially a clawback.
Yeah,
indeed.
Yeah.
Eventually, Brian goes on. Eventually, I would like to resolve the matter, but due to a series of recent events, primarily the death of my father, divorce, and job change, another perfect storm there, another terrible storm. Sorry you're going through that, Brian. Right,
Yeah.
losing your father is hard. Also, piling on a divorce and probably a job loss is tough times. I am not in a great position to pay this debt. No kidding. Would a course of action similar to my first summons buy me time, or should I respond differently? Thank you for your time and consideration.
Well, considering we don't know what's going on in the first action, that's a hard one to answer.
Right.
Sorry, you were going to say something, George.
Brian, yeah, you can certainly use our site to file an answer. Right, we have the premium option where you can have an attorney review the documents. So, like the attorney can take a look at this weird pleading that you got along with the summons, and try to help you figure out what needs to actually happen in regards to that document. You can also chat with our AI and upload that document, try to get its feedback on it, and see what you should do next as well. So that'd probably be a good option. So it can actually take a look at the document you're working with. Great. All right, Brian. We hoping you the best of luck. Everybody, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for coming on. We do the Debt Hotline every week on Wednesdays, so come back next time. And hopefully we can answer your question. If you want to make sure that your question gets answered, leave us a voicemail on our hotline. That's the main points here. Ben, can you just let people know where they can find out more about you? And Upsolve?
So we're at upsolve.org, UPSOLVE, as the sweatshirt says backwards on my camera here. We, as I mentioned before, totally free. You can take our screener on our homepage, see if bankruptcy is a good fit for you. And if it isn't, it'll help you find other options that might be, like solo, like debt management plans, all those good things. We're also on YouTube, produce a lot of content and videos there as well. So if you do have questions, check out our website, check out our YouTube. We're happy to help. There is, I just want to reiterate this, there is hope on the other side of debt. I'm living proof of that. I went from $60,000 in debt to the home that I live in now. So you can definitely find your way to a better future once you deal with that debt.
Yes, that sounds great. An inspiring story for us all, Ben. That's for sure. And folks, yeah, if you have a question, call in to our hotline, which is 801-613-8181. Okay. So again, 801-613-8181. All righty. Until next time, thanks for coming on, Ben.
Yeah,
Everybody
thanks
take
for
care.
being here, George. Nice to see you.